turn off mine.
So get started.
Good evening and welcome to our weekly Tzutzos, Parsha Sparks and Tidbits on the weekly Torah portion. This week the portion is Toldos. The word Toldos means children or offspring, generations. And the first verse begins with the words, and these are the children of Yitzchak, Isaac, ben Avraham, the son of Abraham. Avraham hail this Yitzchak. Abraham fathered Yitzchak. So there's obviously a redundancy here. If it tells you that Yitzchak is the son of Avraham, then it's obvious that Avraham was the one who fathered Yitzchak. And we know how the Torah does not say anything unnecessarily. There must be something deeper in this. So Rashi explains that there was a problem with the birth of Isaac, because we know that Sarah was abducted by Avimelech, the Philistine king. So the cynics were saying that Abraham was not really the father, that Avimelech was the father of Yitzchak, that she conceived from Avimelech and not from Avraham. And therefore God performed a miracle, and he fashioned Isaac's face to resemble that of Abraham. That was the first example of plastic surgery, where God takes the face of Isaac and makes it appear identical to the face of Abraham. So that's why the Torah says, and these are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. But how do we know that he was the son of Abraham? How do we confirm it? Because God did something to demonstrate that Abraham was the father of Isaac. So the repetition is there to tell us that God did something extra in order to prove that Abraham was the father. But let's try to analyze the cynics. The cynics are trying to claim that Abraham was not the father of Isaac. Why would they say a thing like that? Because it was a miracle that a man of that age could father a child. But it's even a bigger miracle that a woman of that age, 90, could be the mother of a child. And Abraham had already been a father of a child. It wasn't that many years before this, and he was still a pretty old individual. So then what's the argument over here that Abraham couldn't be the father? Why not? The problem was with Sarah. How did she have a child? And that no one could deny. So the simple explanation is that a cynic does not have to be logical. The idea of a cynic is that they just try to dampen our enthusiasm about something. You think that this was such a great miracle that Abraham is the father of Isaac? No, he wasn't. Avimelech is the father. That's the simple explanation, that cynicism does not have to be based on logic. As long as they could throw cold water, cause people to lose their enthusiasm for something, they could say things that if you really examine them, they're not really logical. But one could add another insight here, that true, they knew that Abraham must have been the father and not Avimelech. But they were trying to say, you shouldn't realize that you, Abraham, you think that your son is going to be a son to you, following in your footsteps, carrying on the legacy that you established. You're making a big mistake. Isaac is closer to Avimelech. Isaac is not going to be an heir to your whole approach to God, to justice and kindness. Yitzchak will grow up in an environment of Avimelech, the Philistine environment, and therefore he's going to be lost to you. That was what the cynics were trying to say. And God made a point of demonstrating that no, that Isaac was a spitting image of Abraham. The Rebbe once explained, why is that described as if it was a great miracle? What did God do? He made Isaac look like Abraham. Isn't that natural that a child will resemble a father? It doesn't always happen, but it's a more likely thing than not. So why was it considered to be a miracle? And the Rebbe explained that Abraham and Isaac, personality-wise, were totally opposite one another. Abraham was the personification of kindness and love, an expansive, gregarious personality. Isaac was constricted. Isaac was a man of pachad. He had this tremendous awe of God. He was a person who was very much into digging wells, which means digging deep into himself, demanding, not allowing himself any space, so to speak, where he could expand. He was very constricted. Totally opposite personalities. Abraham is Av, is love. Yitzchak is Yira, fear or awe. Abraham is kindness. Yitzchak is judgment. So then, by nature, Yitzchak and Avraham should have looked very different from one another, because a person's personality can be reflected on their face. Abraham, when you looked at Abraham, you saw a man of kindness. When you would have looked at Yitzchak, you would have seen a very stern individual. So that's what God did. He performed this miracle that Isaac should look like Abraham in spite of the fact that he was different. And I'm going to tie this into the end of the Torah portion. At the end of the Torah portion, it talks about how Isaac wanted to bless his son Esav. Esav was the older of the twins, and the Torah mentioned earlier in the parsha that while Rivka loved Jacob, Yitzchak loved Esav. Why he loved him, so Rashi explains, based on the wording of the text of the Torah, that he would always bring his father food, but on a deeper level, he would always say things that would sound like he's a very pious individual. So he really tricked his father, deceived his father into thinking that he's a very righteous person. At any rate, he calls him in. He says, I don't know when I'm going to die, and therefore I want to bless you before I die. That was what Isaac says to Esav. Rivka, Isaac's wife, overhears this, and she summons her son Jacob, and she says, go prepare some food for your father, the type of food that he likes, and you will get the blessing instead of Esav. And Yaakov objects, and he says, but my father will see the ruse here, that I'm not really his son Esav, and I'll get a curse rather than a blessing. So Rivka says, to mollify her son's concern, she says, Olai, this is in chapter 27, verse 13, the curse is upon me, my son. If there's any curse, I will be the one to suffer the consequences. Now, how does that pacify Jacob? Jacob is worried that he's going to be cursed. So now his mother tells him, you know what? You won't be cursed, I'll be cursed. As if Yaakov didn't care about his mother. That's not a valid way of making Jacob feel comfortable doing something that was totally against his nature and could have brought a curse instead of a blessing. So the Rebbe explained that the blessings that Isaac was going to give were not ordinary blessings. They were extraordinary. These were blessings that came from a higher place. We don't find anyone else giving such rich blessings as the ones that Isaac gave. How do you earn such blessings? In Judaism, there's a concept, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. You put in an investment of your energy, you take out a commensurate reward for it. You put in ordinary measures of effort, you get out an ordinary measure of blessing. But when you want to get an extraordinary level of blessing, you want to get something that is out of this world, completely beyond the norm and the natural, something transcendent, your effort has to also be one in which you are prepared to go to the extremes. And that's what Rivka is saying to Yaakov. These are not ordinary blessings. And therefore, we have to be prepared to sacrifice ourselves. I am prepared to be cursed in this effort to get those blessings for you. And you should also be prepared to sacrifice yourself. That's one insight about the blessings. That Rivka was saying that I am going to be prepared to do something unusual because these blessings are unusual. And that's the lesson for us, that whenever we want to generate something very, very special, we have to invest something very special, go the entire length to the extremes in earning that extraordinary blessing. But then there's another teaching over here that ties in with what I started saying before, and that is Yitzchak was a man of gvura. He was a man of sternness. He was very demanding, very calculating, in a good way, in a positive way. Where is that expressed? When Isaac says to his son, Esav, I don't know when I'm going to die. Why was he so concerned he was going to die? Because Rashi explains that when a person reaches the age of their father or mother's passing, they have to already be concerned that they may also be on the way out. So if his mother lived to the age of 127, he was within 5 years of that, he was already calculating. So the Rebbe explains that although his father lived to the age of 175 and he ultimately lived to the age of 180, yet he was very cautious and very calculating and was going to extremes in not taking any chances. That was his nature. And yet, what kind of blessings does he shower on Yaakov, on Jacob? The most exquisite, most extraordinary blessings. What does that tell you? That you can have a very strict demeanor. Temperamentally, you could be a Yitzchak. You could be one of judgment, one of calculating, one of very stern behavior. However, when it comes to giving someone else, you shower them with blessings. We know stories of great tzaddikim, very holy people, who were so demanding of themselves, very strict and very tough. But on the other hand, when it came to helping others, they were the opposite. They were able to give, and give expansively, and give unrestricted. I once heard, it was a chassid, a very holy man, perished in the Holocaust, Rabbi Yitzchak Masmid, Itchen Masmid. He was an extremely ascetic person, hardly ate, hardly slept, devoted his entire life to praying and studying Torah and spreading Judaism. And he was very much not fond of indulging in anything that was beyond the absolute necessity to live on. Yet when a young child came to his house and expressed a desire for some type of a delicacy, which of course he didn't have in his house, he spent a whole day looking for that delicacy for that child. Here's a man his name was Yitzchak, and he was a man who was very, very tough on himself, very strict and very demanding, but when it came to others, he went to the other extreme. He was gracious, loving, kind, and giving. Getting back to the beginning of the Torah portion, Yaakov and Esav are now grown up, and they go different ways. Esav becomes a man of the field, a hunter, and Yaakov is a man who, this is chapter 25, verse 27, he's a man of pure heart, dwells in the tents, and Yitzchak loves Esav, and Rivka loves Jacob. Now, there's a little bit of a difference in the way the Torah expresses their love for their respective sons. When it talks about Esav, it says Yitzchak loved Esav, past tense. Whereas Rivka oheves es Yaakov, she loves Jacob. Not she loved him, but she loves him. What is the reason for this distinction? It should have either used the past tense for both, and Yitzchak loved Esav, and Rivka loved Yaakov, or use the present tense. Yitzchak loves Esav, and Rivka loves Yaakov. So perhaps there's a message over here that Yitzchak, although he loved Esav, he didn't love him in the present tense, he loved him in the past tense. That means when he traced Esav back to his origin, as explained in Hasidic literature, that Esav in his origin, in the source of his soul, had a very holy soul, a very high-level soul. And Yitzchak was able to see that. Yitzchak was the one who dug wells, was able to penetrate deeply into the psyche of everyone. And therefore he looks into Esav's psyche and he sees that in his background, in the past, meaning in his background, in his origin, in his source, there's a lot of holiness there. And that's why he tried to cultivate that holiness by showing him love and offering him the blessings. Whereas Rivka didn't have to look at Yaakov's origins. She loves him because of how he behaved, how he was now, not how he is in his source. And then we have the famous story, Yaakov is cooking lentils. He's cooking a stew, and our sages tell us it was lentils, because later on it says that he gave him a stew of lentils. In the beginning it just says a stew, but we know that it was lentils. And Esav comes from the field and he's weary. What was the story over here? Yaakov was cooking lentils. I mean, this is a little strange. The Torah has nothing else to tell you that Yaakov was cooking beans. It should have just said, if the story is about how Esav is weary and he wants some food, he should have said Esav came to Yaakov and asked him for some food because he was weary. Who cares if it was lentils or anything else? And what is really going on over here? So our sages tell us that there's a lot of background over here. There's a lot of information that is not mentioned in the text itself, but it's very important. Abraham had just passed away. This was the day in which Abraham was buried. This is his funeral day. And the custom is that mourners eat lentils. And since the mourners themselves don't cook their own meal, the first meal has to be given by someone else, Yaakov, the grandson of Abraham, cooks the meal of lentils as a way of comforting the mourners. Why did Abraham die that day as opposed to any other time? He was really supposed to live to the age of 180. But God did not want him to see how his grandson Esav is going to become a very evil person, committing horrible crimes, including murder, adultery, and so on. So what does God do? He takes Abraham away from this world 5 years earlier. On that very day that caused Abraham's death because of Esav's behavior, he comes to Jacob and he says, dump those lentils down my throat. I mean, there couldn't be a greater contradiction. Here he's showing such contempt for his relationship with Abraham. He didn't even come to the funeral. Not only he doesn't come to the funeral, he wants all the lentils for himself. Showing total contempt for Abraham, for his father, for his mother, for his grandmother Sarah, for all of what they stood for. And there can't be a greater focus on this disparity between Yaakov and Esav. And Esav is the firstborn. That means he inherits the legacy of his father. He's the spiritual heir. So Yaakov says to him, the type of behavior you just exhibited you can't be the firstborn. Sell it to me. I'll give you the lentils and you give me the birthright. Now the anti-Semites of the world say, you see, Jacob, this poor brother is famished, he's starving, he's ready to die, and he makes a business deal out of it. He's such an opportunist. No, but that's not what it says there. Yaakov didn't say, I won't give you the food unless you sell it to me. He says, I want you to sell it to me because I see how you don't have any appreciation for the role of the birthright of the firstborn. And Esau says, I don't need it. It's something that is totally objectionable to me. I don't want the birthright. And the Torah makes it very clear that he disgraced the birthright. So Yaakov says, then sell it to me as the day. Not sell it to me today, but as the day. It should be a clear sale. It shouldn't be under duress. And then it says at the end that he ate and he drank and he rose and he left. Which the Torah didn't have to tell you that. Obviously, if Yaakov gave him the food, he ate it, and if there was drink, he drank, and obviously he didn't sit there forever. He got up and he left. But the Torah is trying to tell you that you could think that after he ate and after he drank and he was no longer hungry, he would say to Yaakov, what did you just do to me? You just tricked me into selling my birthright for a pot of lentils. When I was hungry, I was willing to give everything away. Now that I'm not hungry, that's in chapter 25, verse 34. How could you do this to me? You tricked me. So the Torah says, no, he ate and he drank and he got up and he left and he disgraced the birthright. In other words, he didn't have any regrets about it. You know when he had his regrets? Decades later, when Yaakov steals the blessings from him, and Esau discovers it, he says to his father, oh, this is the same Yaakov. The word Yaakov could mean he deceived me. First he takes my birthright, and then he takes my blessing. And in Hebrew, the word birthright is bechora, and the word blessing is baracha. It's the same letters, just two letters inverted. And it seems to be a play on words. And he's now, all of a sudden, decades later, when Yaakov gets the blessings, he's reminded of how he tricked him, quote unquote, tricked him to sell the birthright. He didn't trick him because after he finished eating, he could have said, I don't really feel it was right. You tricked me. It was under duress. And the Torah makes it very clear he did not care about the birthright. Then we find that Yitzchak has to leave where he lived because there was another famine. Just like there was a famine in the days of Abraham, there's a famine in the days of Yitzchak. A lot of things that happened to Abraham happened to Yitzchak. A lot of events with one occurred to the other, and this is one of them. But here, he wants to go to Egypt just like his father did. And God says, no, you can't go to Egypt because you have become holy. As a result of the Akedah, you being bound on the altar, you're like an offering which is holy and cannot be taken out of the land of Israel because it's a holy place. But instead, he tells him to stay where he is, and he ends up with the Philistines in what is now called Gaza. The Gaza Strip was then inhabited by the Philistines, and apparently if God says don't leave this land to go to Egypt, but he was allowed to go to the land of the Philistines, that proves that Gaza too is a part of Israel. It's not just east of the Gaza. The Gaza is also a part of Israel. Then the Torah goes into his venture into well digging and how he had so many problems with the Philistines. They wanted to take his wells. They claimed it for himself until finally he gets one well, which is a symbol of his prosperity and is overcoming the difficulties. Okay, then we get to the story that I mentioned before of Isaac trying to bless his son Esau, and Rivka makes sure that Yaakov should get the blessings. Here we have the anomaly. Yaakov is the ultimate man of truth. The Kabbalists tell us, and this is based on biblical verses, that Abraham personified the virtue of kindness, Yitzchak of judgment, and Yaakov of truth. The word Torah, in fact, describes Yaakov, Ish Tam, a man of purity, of innocence, no guile, no deception. And here he does the ultimate act of deception, dresses up like his brother Esav, and tricks his father into giving him the blessings. And according to one midrash, Yaakov suffered because of this, because when he had to run away to his uncle Lavan, Lavan tricked him, gave him the older sister instead of Rachel, who he had wanted to marry and who her father agreed to give him. So it was a measure for measure. He got punished. That means that it did affect him adversely, even though it was the right thing to do, because his mother commanded him to do it, and as we'll soon see, it was the right thing. But when a tzaddik, when a righteous person does something that is not so kosher, although it's for a greater good, and the good outweighs the bad. It's like a doctor prescribes a medication and it has side effects, and they tell you, well, the doctor determined that the benefit outweighs the risk. That's how we work with medicine. And the same thing over here. He did suffer the risk of losing some of his innocence, but it was important that he do it in order to get the blessings. But the question is, why did Yitzchak want to give the blessings to Esav? One cannot argue that he was so deceived by Esav that he couldn't see through him. I mean, he knew that Esav was not a spiritual person. He knew that he was a man of the field. He was a hunter. In fact, he tells him, go out and hunt for me. He knows he's a hunter. He knows that Yaakov was a man who was sitting and dwelling in the tents, which Rashi says these are the tents of study of Torah, which in those days already existed. That's a separate subject. Yaakov was a studious man who doesn't know of anything tricking and hunting, and Esav is a hunter. The whole idea of hunting is deception. You have to trick the animal into the trap or being in sight of your weapon. So why did Isaac want to give Esav the blessings? So Chassidus explains, and space related to what I said before, that Yitzchak knew Esav was not a righteous person, but he saw into his soul. He saw the sparks of holiness. He saw the source of his soul, and he saw that in the future there will be descendants of Esav that will be extraordinary souls, such as Rabbi Akiva, the greatest sage, the greatest Talmudic sage, Rabbi Meir, one of the greatest Talmudic sages, Onkelos, the translator of the Torah into Aramaic. We're talking about some of the greatest Jewish leaders of all times were his descendants. Those were the sparks in his soul, and that's what Yitzchak saw. And that gave him the feeling that I have to give him the blessing to help him actualize that potential. But Rivka was right, because she saw not just Esav's source, she saw the way Esav was in reality. And she realized that his reality was so far from his source, so far from his essence, you could say, that there's no way that they're going to get connected. The blessings will be a waste. It's like pouring water down the drain. No one benefits from that because no one is receiving anything. Giving the blessings to Esav, whose behavior was so far from that which existed in the core of his soul, that it would have not changed Esav one bit, and the blessings would have been squandered. Instead, she said, let Yaakov put on the clothing of Esav, which is meant not just literally to trick the father into thinking it's Esav, but that's exactly how Yaakov gives the blessings and the benefit from the blessings to Esav as well. Rivka was not trying to deny Esav his blessing. What she was trying to do is make sure that the blessings go to Yaakov, who can very easily and efficiently and effectively absorb that blessing, that energy. And when Yaakov enters into the garments of Esav, which means When Yaakov enters into the material world and works in the material and physical world and eats and drinks and sleeps and does everything that the Esav does, but does it with the voice of Jacob, with an inner voice, an inner spiritual voice, that will eventually affect and influence and inspire Esav that he too will be blessed and be rehabilitated, which will happen at the end of time, in the days of Mashiach, where it says that Esav will also be rehabilitated. How does that work? Because Yaakov got the blessings, and by us being in exile, by us living in Esav's domain, especially since the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, who are considered to be the descendants of Esav, we are affecting and influencing and transforming Esav, and little by little revealing his source so that he too could enjoy the benefits of the future redemption. Have a good evening and a good Shabbos.